The diner was half empty that afternoon, sunlight spilling lazily through the dusty glass windows, catching the soft steam rising from cups of coffee and half-eaten plates of pancakes. It was just another ordinary day in a small town outside of Denver, until it wasn't. Jason Miller sat in the corner booth with his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, her small fingers clumsily breaking apart her stack of chocolate chip pancakes. He wasn't really paying attention to the food, though. His gaze had drifted almost unconsciously to the young waitress at the counter, a girl who looked far too tired for her age, yet still tried to smile through the exhaustion. Her name tag read, Emily. She had that quiet sadness in her eyes, the kind people carried when life had been a little too unfair. But then, in a moment that would change everything, Jason's eyes caught something that made his chest tighten. The diner manager, a heavyset man in his late 50s named Carl, was leaning in too close to her, his voice low, his smirk uncomfortable. And then, without warning, Jason saw him reach out and grab Emily's hand, holding it a second too long while she tried to pull away with a strained laugh. That was it. Jason didn't think. He didn't weigh the consequences. He simply stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and crossed the room in 3 long strides. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, courage, and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it. Because stories like this remind us that one act of decency can change someone's life. Jason's voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp as steel. He didn't raise his hand, didn't shout, but the quiet authority in his tone made everyone in the diner turn to look. He told Carl that it wasn't okay, that no woman should have to feel uncomfortable in her own workplace, especially not by someone in charge. The manager stammered, tried to make excuses, but Jason's unwavering stare made him back off. Emily stood there, frozen, shock painted across her face, her trembling hands clutching the order pad. When the moment ended and the manager retreated toward the kitchen, the entire diner went silent. Jason just nodded at her gently as if to say, "You don't have to thank me." Emily blinked, her throat tight with emotion. She'd worked there for nearly 2 years, enduring too many moments like that, always too afraid to speak up. Rent was due, bills were piling up, and jobs weren't easy to find in their small town. But for the first time in a long while, someone had stood up for her. She couldn't stop replaying that moment in her mind as she poured Jason's coffee, her hands still shaking slightly. He looked up, smiled faintly, and thanked her. Not just for the refill, but for doing her job with such grace despite the obvious strain she carried. Jason was a single father, raising Lily on his own since his wife Anna passed away 3 years earlier from breast cancer. Life hadn't been kind, but he'd learned to be steady for his daughter's sake. He worked long hours as a mechanic, barely making ends meet, and he often brought Lily to the diner on weekends as a small treat. Emily, he would later learn, was only 24 and had been caring for her younger brother since their parents had died in a car accident. 2 broken people, trying to hold life together in different ways, crossing paths on an ordinary afternoon that turned extraordinary. After that day, Jason and Lily started coming by the diner more often. Emily always seemed to light up when they entered. She'd bring Lily extra whipped cream on her pancakes or draw little smiley faces with chocolate syrup. Sometimes Jason would catch her glancing at him, not with romantic curiosity, but with quiet gratitude, as if she finally felt seen in a world that often looked the other way. But life has a cruel way of testing those who've already suffered enough. A few weeks later, Jason noticed Emily had stopped smiling. Her eyes looked puffy, her movements distracted. When she brought over his coffee, he asked gently if everything was okay. She hesitated, then confessed that after the incident with Carl, things had gotten worse. The manager had cut her hours, found petty reasons to criticize her, and made her job unbearable. She couldn't afford to quit, but staying meant enduring the daily tension and humiliation. Jason listened quietly, his hands tightening around the coffee mug. He didn't have much, but he had always believed that if good people did nothing, then the world would keep breaking people like Emily. That evening, he made a decision. He started spreading word among his friends at the auto shop, asking if anyone knew a diner or cafe that was hiring. Within a few days, he found a small family-run coffee shop on the outskirts of town looking for help. Without hesitation, he printed the address on a scrap of paper and gave it to Emily the next morning when she served him breakfast. She stared at it, her voice trembling as she said she didn't know how to thank him. Jason just shrugged and said that sometimes the best way to repay kindness is to keep living and never let anyone make you feel small again. Emily smiled then, a real smile this time, the kind that made even the weary diner lights seem warmer. Weeks turned into months. Emily got the job at the new cafe. She worked hard, saved a little, and slowly began to rebuild her life. Sometimes she'd still see Jason and Lily come in after school, the little girl waving eagerly through the window. Emily would always come out with a hot chocolate for Lily and a coffee for Jason, refusing to let him pay. He'd protest, but she'd smile and say, "You already paid it forward." What Jason didn't realize was that his small act of courage had rippled far beyond that diner. After Emily left, other staff members began speaking up about Carl's behavior, and soon the diner's owners launched an internal review. Carl was fired a month later. Emily only heard about it through town gossip, but she didn't feel anger, just relief. She had finally escaped the fear that used to follow her home every night. For Jason, life continued to be a steady rhythm of work, school pickups, and bedtime stories. But sometimes, when he was fixing a car late at night, he'd catch himself thinking about Emily, about how strong she'd been, about how people like her reminded him that even the smallest stand could mean everything. He hadn't stood up for her because he wanted anything in return. He did it because he couldn't bear to see someone else crushed under the weight of silence. Then one rainy evening, nearly a year later, Jason's car broke down outside of town. Lily was at her friend's house, and he was stranded on the side of the road, frustrated and exhausted. He decided to walk to the nearest open cafe for help, and fate, it seemed, had a strange sense of timing. The glowing sign of the cafe where Emily now worked flickered through the rain like a beacon. When he stepped inside, dripping wet, Emily looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes widened, then softened into a warm, disbelieving smile. She brought him a towel, then a cup of steaming coffee before he could even ask. They talked for hours that night, about life, about grief, about how both of them had learned to rebuild after loss. Jason confessed that some nights he still struggled to keep going for Lily's sake. Emily shared that she'd finally enrolled in community college to study social work because she wanted to help people like herself, people who'd been made to feel powerless. In that quiet cafe, surrounded by the scent of rain and coffee, two people who had once been strangers realized they had saved each other in ways they hadn't even noticed. Jason's act of protection had given Emily the courage to start over. Emily's resilience had reminded Jason that healing was possible, even after heartbreak. They didn't rush anything. There were no grand declarations or instant love stories, just two souls finding comfort in knowing that sometimes kindness comes back around in unexpected ways. Months later, Emily became a regular part of Jason and Lily's lives. She joined them for dinner, help Lily with her homework, and bring laughter back into a home that had felt too quiet for too long. It wasn't perfect. Life never was. But it was real. Jason watched as Emily grew stronger, more confident, and more at peace with herself. And he knew deep down that stepping up that day in the diner hadn't just changed her life, it had changed his too. If you're still watching this and this story has touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to help us keep spreading stories that remind the world that courage and compassion still matter. As the sun set one evening, Jason sat on the porch watching Lily and Emily laugh together as they watered the small garden they'd planted. He realized that the woman who once couldn't look anyone in the eye without fear now smiled without hesitation. And in that smile, he saw the proof that sometimes the simplest act, standing up, speaking out, doing what's right, can create ripples that heal far beyond what we can see. So before this story ends, tell us in the comments, would you have stepped in that day if you were Jason? Because maybe that's what the world needs more of. People who don't think twice before doing what's right. And as night fell over their quiet little town, Jason whispered softly to himself, watching Emily and Lily chase fireflies under the porch light. Maybe this is what second chances look like. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better, real, imperfect, and born out of a single selfless moment of courage that turned strangers into family.